Why don't you put that in quotes? They just dress like nurses?
Jeez. Whoa. Nurses? Have you met a nurse?
Yeah, I work with them all the time. But nurses
Oh my gosh. I already slacked out the link to the stream, okay? So.
I have approved back, especially the older ones. Oh my god. They mislabel ancient names.
Yeah, I don't know. We were wondering why it was so quiet on Saturday. We're all like, wow, Saturday is a real peaceful day. Alright, we are... we pick on you because we love you, Nora. That's fine, right? Could be. Anyway, we're doing some more Sequelize today. So let's get a quick fist five from the people who actually showed up of how they're feeling about Sequelize. Come on, more than like 2 of you. Alright, that's good. We're getting there. Alright, so Sequelize is pretty tough. There's a lot to it. Well, good news for you. The entire activity today is just adding Sequelize to an application. So you have another 3 hours to cement that information into your brain, and then another class 2 to go over some more stuff. I don't know. So we'll have plenty of time to get used to it. It is a pretty good tool. It's confusing. There's a lot to it. It's a big library for sure, but it will be very helpful for Project 2, I think, helping you guys get your project done faster. We'll slack out the teams again today so everyone can remember what team they're on. I know it's been a while, and we want to give you the opportunity to work with them if you'd like. You don't need to start your project now, Kyle. So I'm just saying, I heard through the grapevine that, oh, Nor maybe, I don't know. You know, you guys are, we got a narc in the class. Yeah, I actually don't care. If you guys want to start planning, we don't know all the details yet. We're not giving that out until week 16. But if you want to start planning, I mean, you can pretty much guess it's probably going to be a website. There's probably going to be a node server, probably a MySQL database. That'd just be my thought. I don't know. So if you wanted to get started, I don't really care, but nothing official, right? We can't condone it. But if it happened, it did. I mean, yeah, it is what it is. So Sequelize has been tough. I get that. Let's do a quick overview of what it is again. We'll just touch on that a little bit. So what is Sequelize? It's an ORM, exactly. It's designed specifically for Node to handle all those JavaScript, all the JavaScript code we need to write to make MySQL calls or SQL Server calls or Postgres calls. Whatever you wanted to do in terms of SQL, Sequelize can do it for you. What is the Sequelize model? It's a table, exactly. It represents a table as an object in JavaScript. Has some helper functions on it and stuff to help you use it. Allows you to basically manipulate that data right there from a nice object, as opposed to having to work with like an array of records or something. You know, that's really kind of less intuitive. And what Sequelize CRUD methods did we already go over? Well, we've gone over a find one. So that's how you can pull one model from the database, right? A find all. You can pull all of the records back and put them into models. There's a create function, which is to create a new record in the database, right? So that's pretty much all we've covered so far with Sequelize. Pretty bare bones. So we haven't gone too in-depth on anything yet, but we're going to go more in-depth today. Does anyone have any questions on the Sequelize stuff before we move on? Any outstanding, lingering things that they want answered before we start the exercises? Nope. Cool. All right, well, today we're going to be making a to-do app. So this is the final version. We can add a to-do. This is something I need to do. Hit enter, and I've got a nice to-do. If I want to mark it done, I can. Boom, it's done. You'll notice when I refresh, It still shows up as completed. I can delete it when I am totally done. I refresh, it's still gone. I go to add a blank to-do. It does not let me add blank to-dos. It doesn't give any validation, but that's okay. You guys aren't supposed to work on any of the HTML today. You're only doing back-end stuff. So let's make some more to-dos. And this is pretty much what I got. I have the ability to mark them as completed, see them in this list, add a bunch of stuff. You can't add any that are blank again. And you also notice that they all default as incomplete, right? They haven't been completed yet. Let's delete a few. Mark a few more completed. I'll refresh again. So from the UI, not a whole lot of functionality, but there's obviously a lot going on the server with SQLize, the database, and all that stuff that could be happening on your machine, right? Here's the deal with today's activities. They're in phases. Activity 7 through 10 is what we're working on. And each phase is adding a little bit more to this application. The first activity we're going to do, for instance, is getting SQLize ready, initializing it, initializing the database, syncing your table, kind of get everything ready to go, right? If you go through these activities, if you find that you're finishing them early and you want to move on, you are welcome to. If you finish activity 10 and you feel like you've got everything done and you understand it, I am fine if you are done with class. But you have to prove to me that you've done that. So if you are working online, you'll have to find some way to prove to me. Deploy to Heroku. You guys have an even harder job because you're streaming. You have to deploy it to Heroku so I can see it. If you want to leave class. But I guess you're streaming, so how am I going to know? To be realistic. But anyway, if you decide to move on faster because it's easy for you or you figured it out and you don't want to wait the entire period of the activity, by all means, go ahead and work ahead. So, does anyone have any questions on this app right here, what we're doing, SQLize, anything that's left kind of outstanding that you like answered before we get going? Anything at all? Okay, well then we're going to jump to activity 7, where you're basically going to be taking this initial API application that does this to-do stuff. You're going to be ripping out the old ORM. You're going to be bringing in SQLize. All you're going to be doing in this first activity is initializing SQLize with the SQLize CLI, initializing the models, syncing everything, making sure it connects to the database, changing your connection strings, all of that fun stuff. So you got to make sure this all works. When you run Node Server and you're done with this activity, you should have the database created with the proper tables, and you've been connected and everything. You're good to go. You don't have to create any data yet. You don't have to query any data yet. You just got to set it all up, right? So that's activity 7. It's the first one we're going to do. So I'll Slack out the instructions too on Slack for you and put them up on the screen. But they should be in GitLab, and go ahead and get started. And don't be afraid to work with people around you. By all means, you can work as a group, bounce things off each other. Don't forget in this first activity there are a lot of gotchas with the SQLize CLI and setting up the tables, so it's going to be trickier than it sounds, I think. Stowaways here. Yeah. Nice. I heard you broke into the building for the alarm the other day.
So unless you got video proof.
Alright, I'm just saying, JJ says one of our students hung around after clinics and set off the alarm, so looking at you.
I streamed on Wednesday.
Well, Monday though.
I left before you guys left. You were the last one to
Likely story.
That's what we thought too, but you know what? You could have gone down the stairs and tucked under real quick, you know, so we didn't see you.
You're not wrong. You guys don't do it first.
Wow.
Stowing away in the bathroom stall. Plotting with mine.
Hey, since JJ showed up on Monday, Wednesdays, I have, you know, relegated that thorough sweep to him. So he can do it.
Like we talking about.
So close.
No one did that. It's against the rules.
Yeah, we would never do that.
Yeah.
Thanks for not leaving me open.
Did you?
Yeah, we don't open doors around here.
Rules are important.
Yeah.
Like require a form or something. Yeah, I just commented it all out. That, we got rid of that. And then I think it's that form, .get to use, form, all of the forms that we use. I kept everything, I kept like the app.get and everything. The only thing I got rid of was the form.
Ooh. I forgot to show you guys in this final app. There's also editing. I totally forgot to show that. So look, that's cool. We can edit. Nice. Anyway, carry on.
So they fixed boot camp spot times, and then now they're broken because of daylight savings.
There's a valuable lesson in this, and that is, obviously they were overconfident because everyone knows time zones is probably the hardest problem in software development. And if you try to solve it, you're gonna fail. And look at what they've done. Consistent failure. So, someone was overconfident over there at Trilogy, thinking they could beat the time zone problem, and look what has happened. Everyone is late to class. Yeah, the phone. It doesn't even work. Wow.
Folder.
And maybe you did it wrong for
Maybe you don't have most of it done already. We had to do these things. What I can do that.
Until after we're done.
And you also have to do.
We're 25 minutes ahead of schedule.
Yeah, so that content folder, you gotta delete that one.
Oh, but on Wednesday.
And I had a little ones on advanced percentage. That was number 3, delete the company. Number 4, new computer still. And then number 5, recreate those folders.
It feels better.
You don't know this, we're trying to start about doing that, so. Why would you do that?
Because it starts at 10 now.
What happened?
Because of the time change.
Uh-huh.
Now I work 10 to 6 instead of 5. So I work Eastern hours. I work midnight to 8 a.m.
So you were working 9 to 5, so you were late to work every day?
I would go into work late.
Oh, okay.
I don't take lunch at work anyways. So
Oh, so
I
it's
would
not
use
like
my
you
lunch
need to
break.
officially be there at this time?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm not hourly.
Did you choose to work those hours?
No. Actually. So when I moved out here, my boss never told me that was a shift. And nowhere on the contract I signed said that was a shift, so I assumed I'd be working the day before like I normally did.
Yeah.
And I was really wrong. And then 5 years later, I'm sitting in this class, I'm trying to get out of that.
It happens, huh?
Yeah, I mean it's fine. I like getting up at night. It's more review.
So what?
Yeah,
What does that have to do with anything?
Some people say people like that. I don't know. So it was in the algorithm. So like every time they go on the boss, it's like a nice
Really? I guess that makes sense. I wish we had more of like that here. Everyone just worked later at night because it's so hot during the damn day. But people like, you know.
Yeah, it's weird, like, churches hit our
Yeah.
Pretty much, they're 1 for 1.
Oh, schema just
I'm sorry, this is true, man. This is true, I'm sorry.
Is it true though?
It's so true.
Is it?
Well, now that you asked Rolando, I'm taking it.
It's not true anyway.
It is no longer. It was furious.
So even that is when we type the sequelize. Let's do sequelize again. I forgot the exact. synchronize init for model, and synchronize init for computer. Still the yeah, what's up? Informal type of commands.
We're taking the time machine back. That's the
Well, let's go even further back. Whenever we got that 4i ASU or whatever that before you fucking turned out to
I can do the split screen VS
Control and then backslash or control pipe, whatever you want.
Oh, there we go.
Wait, what's that called?
Yeah, what's that string line called? A pipe or
Pipe.
Pipe.
P-I-P-E. Yeah.
So it's just like
Some people will call it horizontal bar, but these people are scrubs. Don't listen to them.
I don't even know.
I'm pretty pretentious with all the horizontal lines. So
Some of these things, I'm like, oh, we get to use it. I'm like,
I mean, it's not even horizontal. It's technically vertical, right? It's up and down, so... Vertical bar. Maybe they call it vertical bar. I don't know. They call it some bar, but it's a pipe.
What's going on below 45 degrees?
What?
The one under.
That's backslash.
Isn't that 45 degrees?
It could be backwards 45-degree pipe, yeah. Is anyone stuck on anything? Having any errors or anything? Are we all good? Moving on.
Trying to make my model right now.
Cool. Don't forget to use the activities from from Saturday, because the model, remember, has to be wrapped in that function, because we're using the special Sequelize. It can't just be in a file exported directly.
Null is our password.
Yeah. Blank quotes, yeah.
Oh, what happens if I do pass it like hack?
I have no idea. Probably the same thing.
That's like
Yeah.
the default. Yeah, that's the default. That's why I was wondering if I had to change it to every form search, it would actually just leave it blank.
well, why don't you just do that Sequelize sync from the and then you very bottom of the shirt. And just like that, and then the other two is it's about once a year. And back then, I think things was more for just like the year after maybe the bottom.
Did you put the loose this in?
Wait, for the host, do I make that local host? Is that what you meant? I forgot which one it was. Oh no, yeah, no, that was the same. I think it's the same. Oh, to the building? I think this to install a package globally, but it's telling me can't because it doesn't have root access.
Sudo npm install sg.
So sudo and then paste it. No, SUD. Not actually.
I just caught you do something reading.
I did the equalizer make from the reasoning, but I didn't do the install dash G equalizer was right. Whatever works for you, the other way around. It runs part of it. Part of it. So there's an 8 you guys are Apparently now it's not to see if the table got created, so it's up to what from I forgot what the table was. Well, the database is supposed to be.
All right. How's everyone doing? Did we all initialize our to-do list app? You get everything done with Sequelize? Okay, Fist of 5. How did that one go? Almost getting there? Okay, let's walk through it together. The first thing you need to do, database, is create the to-do list database, right? That's it. You don't need to create a table for it. You don't need to do anything else. You just have to have the database available so Sequelize can get to it. Cool. So from here, I already have the Sequelize CLI installed globally, but if you want to install it, you do npm IG Sequelize CLI, right? The I is just short for install. And then, like I slacked out in the channel, you need Sequelize installed in the dependencies of this package if you want to be able to run the Sequelize CLI. So I got to install these, or the Sequelize CLI is not going to do anything. Now I believe it was config and models you have to run, right? For the initialization stuff. Init models and config, yeah. So we need to init the models, and we can Sequelize init the config. And mine both failed because they already exist and we're running the solution, but had they not, I would have gotten this config file, and you'll get this index.js file in your models folder, right? So you have two extra folders, config and models. So in the config, you want to find the development database right here, and you want to replace the information in this with your information. So I'm sure null and blank are the same when they're rendered by MySQL, or when they're checked by MySQL, but so just in case you were wondering about that, I'm fairly certain they're the same, but we'll find out as soon as I run this. Anyway, the development one is one we want to use because when we went over the index.js on Saturday, if you remember, it uses the development environment by default, unless you change that manually, and we're not going to. So we have this, it's all generated for us, that's well and good. Now we need to create a model for our to-do. So if you create a to-do.js folder in the models to-do.js file in the models folder, you can start doing that. Now remember, because we are generating the database object with Sequelize, we now need to export our models as functions, and those functions will return our model, which then can be used from the database as like an aggregate object, as opposed to just having to import whatever models, right? So we can just import the database. So this function takes in the Sequelize instance, the connection, and it also takes in information about the data types. So we'll define a new model. We can use const here if we want. Off Sequelize, the connection, we can call .define. We give it a name. So to-do will turn into to-dos in the database. And then we define the columns. We have a text column, That's our to-do text, right? I have to feed the dog or whatever. And we're going to make that a string. And then whether or not it's complete, we're going to make that a Boolean. True or false. That's when I click that check mark in the final app, right? And then we can return that model. So this is the trickiest part. One of the trickiest parts, I think, because it's such a different structure from what we learned the first day. Having to use this weird function and stuff. So get used to this kind of format. You might as well get this function signature down pat because we have to use it for everything, right?
Right, so that one you don't have to do the sync it in that one?
We don't sync it in here. We will sync it, but we don't sync it in here.
Okay.
If you were to sync it right here, you could, but then it's kind of hard to tell when that's happening. You'd have to go into each model file, right? It makes it a little bit more hidden. So now that we've got that all defined, you'll notice we don't have anything in our API routes yet. We don't have to do anything here. We just have our model built. We can go ahead and look at our server.js. And in our server.js, before we start the app, that's when we want to sync our database. So what we do is we just require that models folder. Whoa, it's huge. We just require that models folder because that models folder is the index.js, and by default, when you require, it's going to bring in the index.js file if you don't specify a specific file. And so that's that database, right? That database has all of our models on it. In this case, it has to-do. It'll have the to-do model. But we want to sync everything on the database, so we just call the db.sequelize.sync and sync all of them at once. Right now we only have to-do. It's fine, but if you had 10 tables or 15 tables or, you know, a real large-scale app and you have, 12,000 tables or something crazy, right? You don't want to do that by hand. Granted, you probably wouldn't use Sequelize if you're dealing with that many tables, but still. Anyway, once we do that, it'll return, it has a .then that you call for the promise. Inside that promise callback, you can start the application. So let's run through this really quick. And it seemed to work. Now, if we want to verify that it did work, well, one, you can see in the console, it created the table to-dos with all the information as an auto-increment ID, as a text field, as a varchar 255, as a complete as a tiny int with size of 1, and then a created at and an updated at that are put in there for us by Sequelize. So if we go ahead and open up this bad boy, we can look at our tables and we can see the to-dos and we can just select the rows. There's nothing in here, but you can kind of interrogate MySQL and see that this actually happened. Anyone have any questions on this phase, the initialize phase? You're going to have to do this for your project, so it's a good one to remember.
So in the to-do.js, when you're creating a table, you do like var to equals sequelize.define. You said it makes an S automatically after like the...
Yes, right here?
Yeah.
It makes it plural, yeah, if it can. Okay. So to do, the plural's to-dos. Yeah. So it'll make it plural. If you have like city, it should, I haven't verified with this, it should make it cities with an IES. And then things where it doesn't know what to do, like mouse, it might not know what to do, right? Even though we know it's mice, it may not have any idea that it's supposed to do that because mouses isn't correct. So it might put it as mouses. You might have to specify mice and tell it not to do anything with that. There's a lot of ways you can solve that problem, but yeah, it adds an S.
So then it's like the variable, the table name, or is that the table name?
This is the model name. This is the model reference, the object, right? So this is the one you're actually going to be using. This is just what Sequelize internally references it by. So when it's doing Sequelize stuff, it's like, oh, this to-do is basically what relates to our tables. And it's kind of just for you, because you could make this whatever you wanted. It's kind of just for you to remember that an individual to-do is a to-do, right? But like I said, you can change this to whatever you want and tell it not to change the table name. So if we did this, you can pass in a second set of options, and there's freeze. Oh my gosh, I think it's freeze table name. Something like that. I'd have to go look at the option. But there's another option for it that you can basically tell it not to do anything, and it won't. It won't add the S, it won't try to pluralize it or anything like that.
So when we're like manually querying the tables, we have to do like to-dos for the table name?
Yes, if we look at your, well, if you check out your MySQL, you can see it created a table to-dos for me. Any other questions? In the server.js, you just import the models folder. Yep, with a require. And then that's this DB object that you can then use the models on, the SQLized instance, connection, whatever. Cool. Okay, we are moving on to activity 8. So activity 8, you're going to be adding the find all and the create routines to find all your to-dos and make new to-dos. These are going to be in your API routes, right? So you're going to have to import in the DB and use the to-do instance off that DB to be able to create and find all. And if you finish early, check out the docs, try to get used to the docs and see if you can't figure out what's going on. Don't forget in this one to update the config.json and do your npm install and all that stuff. You don't have to do the initialize phase. It's done for you, but you still need to set up your connections and all that stuff. Make sure it actually connects to the database.
still get blown. You mentioned using the dual arrows, that if there's only one player, you don't need it. See that? Function
The anonymous functions?
anonymous function notation for equals make an arrow.
To go to, yeah.
Right, you don't need, if there's only one player, you don't need.
I pushed up the wrong key.
Wait. Really?
Open like the new Chrome, type it in, and then paste it in.
Alright, let's go over the find all and create functionality. How was this one? Fist of 5. This one is a little easier than the setup one. Once you got it set up, we're good to go. Setup is always the worst, right? We all remember MySQL. So really the functionality here was after you set up the config, all pretty much in this API routes. Not much else had to change. So what did we have to do explicitly? Well, first thing we have to do is import in the models, which they might have given you. I didn't look at the unsolved. And then we need to go ahead and we need to get all of the to-dos, right? So we have an API endpoint to /API/to-dos to get them all, find them all, and the DB that you're importing has all of the to-dos on it as properties, right? So you have a reference that to-do model, so you can just access it really easily. And then from there, you can access the find all routine. Find all is pretty easy to use. If you give it nothing, an empty object, it's going to just get everything, right? And so what it's going to do is return all of the to-dos in a list here, and then we can just res.json, send it back up to the client. Now to test it, obviously you have to add some to-dos manually into the database, right? Or you could hook up the create and have it do it for you. So the create, a little bit more work involved with the create. Again, we have to access the DB, we have to access the to-do instance, and we need to call the create function. Now this takes in an object that effectively represents the values that are going to be inside of the record in MySQL, right? So we have to match the properties of the model. So it has a text and a complete property on that model. The text is obviously a string, like we said, and the complete is a Boolean. So you just assign those in the create, and then you wait for the promise to finish. If it's successful, we'll get here. This is going to be our new to-do, this DB to-do. This is going to be what comes out of the database as the new record, and then we can just res.json, send it on its merry way up into the ether, right? Are there any other questions on this activity? Cool. So a couple of things to help you out. Console log a bunch when you're doing this, right? So console log in your post to see what your body looks like when you are waiting for it to create, or you want to see what's going to happen. And starting there too, if you have like a post endpoint and you aren't sure what's going to come in from the the front end, console log it before you add any functionality to hook it up, right? So kind of give yourself a head start there and know what you're going to get from the UI before you start injecting it into the database. Or you can define it here and then fix the UI if the UI is not exactly what you want. But we're not supposed to fix the UI here, so we should assume what's coming in is what we expect. And it should be. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a little bit about what we're going to do in the next activity. So in this one, should be good. Should be localhost 8080. If you've been running it, you know that at this point we're here, right? But now we have the ability to update. And delete. So in this part of the exercise, we are adding the update and delete. This is activity 9. Now we haven't seen update and delete at all we saw kind of delete on Saturday, but we haven't looked at update at all. So this one's kind of tougher because you guys got to go out to the docs and you got to figure out how these work and add them into your code. So we're going to fill in those other 2 endpoints and then go from there.
Wait, so I just added something to the certificate, like this stuff. That's like select use I should be able to see what the target for this is. So the ID, the first step, language, secret. Really the only thing this should do is make this one. Wait, you can do that. Wait, it's for
Refresh.
that. I just had that same problem. You have to do it again and then like you send the JSON back to the user. If you make the delete function again, so that it'll update HTML. Like send the object back after you do it, send it back there. So after I do it, load up your where your ID is whatever, and at that closing parentheses do a dot then. And then make a function like the one above for the create, and then send back the res.json to them, so that it updates the page. Makes this every time you update the code, update the I moved it around, but yeah, that was fine. But yeah. I think control Z is undo, control Y is undo.
You guys got it?
It won't update the page when I update the record after that. But it updates on pages.
Yeah. So you shouldn't have to update the page. You shouldn't have to do anything to the HTML and the output.
No, right, that's right. Like I'm sending back the response of the JSON, but it just won't.
Are you sending it back at the right time?
Probably not. That's what I'm trying to do.
In there? No.
Not one. Those are popped out in the hole. So that would mean that it's not equal to the hole. But it doesn't work like this. So I just change this. I do that, and I correct that line. So we don't get lucky in any way. I don't know where else I would put it. Yeah, when it's favorite, I like up the node bar and start you just instead of doing node server.js, you just type node log server.js.
What's your first style?
Mine like that.
Okay, there's a call.
MLN method. Oh. Yeah, I guess it's your
And there's a call called update that you can get off of the DB doc to do upload. That's what it is.
I don't know how much I got me in some long time ago.
That might.
So here's what technically worked if you did a dot then after the update attributes and waited until then to set it.
npm dash I or npm I dash G space npm space I space dash G space. I guess that's not my work. Where resource it was.
So when it's so Google is installed in the AZZL folder or where is it installed in Google? Well, thanks.
Yeah, you just need to have. I need to have them. So I knew what the problem was. Just didn't realize that you could just nest ends because it was when you update the database, you then need to wait for that to update before you send the JSON back. Because if you try to send the JSON back first, it'll render that and then it'll update. Yeah, exactly. So you have to put. What did you say was the difference between the update and update attributes? Then?
Update attributes probably is on the individual item. So it would have worked, I think, if it was updating the database.
It was,
working,
yeah, it was working.
But there was probably returning a promise, so you had to do a dot then to wait until after the update.
Yeah, that's what I did. I messed it up.
Yeah, so you can do that, or you can just use the static update call off of the model itself.
Oh,
Yep. This one right here.
yeah, because it was pretty much sending back the JSON for the is what was happening.
Whoa, but that one wasn't much.
I was in the relay science building and but in the science building is like first not built up. Like the room where they sell products, it's at least one. Like you know they sell shirts and
Gift shop?
only like the fourth floor. And on the road you have like so
Nice.
it's just a gift shop, so it's usually like a closet.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm doing something.
Interesting. Alright, let's go over this activity. Fist of 5, how was this one? This was a little tougher. We had to kind of experiment ourselves, but we did okay. Okay, good. Alright, so we already did the NPM install and all that when I showed you how this one worked. So let's take a look at the differences now. First one, we have delete. So in the delete code, again with our delete, we're going to have a route that's going to have a parameter in it so we can specify what to do to destroy. In this case is the term they use. And then off of the db.todo, you call the destroy function destroy actually takes in special options, right? So one of them is where. Where is what we use to identify the single to-do we want to delete. If we call an open destroy, we'll probably destroy everything in the database, and we don't really want to do that. So we just we specify with this where the ID of the to-do we want to delete, right? Which we pull from the URL params. Should match one that's in the database unless the user decided to randomly submit IDs to this endpoint, which they could do. And then when it's done, we'll do a res JSON just to confirm it's done, and the UI will take care of it, remove it from that list, refresh, whatever it needs to do. Any questions on the destroy call? So update is very similar to create. It's like a mixture of the create and the destroy now, or create and the find all or find one or whatever, right? So it's a put. We don't need any parameters in our URL for a put, right? Because we're updating an existing resource. So we use information, well, actually we should have the parameter in there. Normally it's best practice to have like an ID or something that you're updating, some specific resource on the put. But you don't technically need to, because you can pass that information through the body, right? So you could pass it in as a JSON body in your request. So we call the db.todo.update routine. And in there we specify what fields are going to change, right? So in this case we want to update text and complete with the information that comes from the body of the request. So we'll send in the text and the new complete status, true or false. Then we also have to specify in a second object our where clause. So there's additional options on the update. So we could just run update with just this, but then everything would be updated to be that to do. So not the best experience for the user. Or we can use this where and identify the single to do that we want to update, right? So again, just like the delete, we specify based off of the ID that comes in from the request. Now how do you know that this ID is here? Well, if you console log the body before you do anything, you'd be able to see that you get a text, complete, and the ID. We wait for the dot then, we get the updated to do, and we send it back. Any questions on this one? Garrett, did you ever figure out your problem?
Yeah.
What was it? Okay, yeah, that'll do it. Rolando also found another way to do this one too, if you would like to Slack that out, where he actually did a find one, got the one, and then updated it specifically. So there are multiple ways you can do a lot of these. So his is slightly different, but also worked because we are only updating one. So you can do that as well. If there are no more questions, are there any questions? There's something in Slack. Let's just make sure. 3. Andy, I don't know what 3 means. Andy slacked us 3. 4. Okay. Lovely. All right. If that's the case, then let's take a 15-minute break. Be back at 8:15. And if Andy, if you have more to add, I'll answer your question. Or oh, that must have been his fist of 5. Oh, I got it. Oh yeah, good job. Good. I'm glad.
So dumb. He was smarter than all of us. He was thinking of that. I don't like that. I don't like people think that.
That article I put in Slack is right. It's like a CRUD 101 for SQLize.
It's not a bad idea. Finding articles like that, they'll help you a lot.
Yeah, that's where I got that update, whatever it's called, update attributes is what they use. That was messy if you didn't have that nested then.
Remember, you can return, and then you can just do another then call if the first then call. And then you don't need to do the nested then. What's up?
I interviewed for a job today that, once they told me the hours, training is going to get in the way with, last by like 1 hour, 2 days a week, or maybe 2 weeks. And he asked me to ask you if there's anything possible. If you're like maybe coming an hour late, those like Monday, Wednesday.
Is it Monday to Friday training?
Yeah, it goes until 7. That's it's over by the channel that we're talking about.
Well, considering the next week's a project week.
No? Okay. Well, it wouldn't even start for 3 weeks before, so.
Okay. Yeah, so those are the React weeks. It's up to you, and you might need the React weeks. It might be 1 week. I don't care if you show up late. You got a job, man. That's whole point.
Well, I think they brought me on to the next step now. It's actually something I can do something just right after the class is done.
Nice.
Graduate. It's Grubhub.
Nice.
They have an office over there, and they talked about getting into the development side.
So you need to do it first.
So like support.
Okay.
It's like a senior support.
Yeah, that could be a good stuff for sure. Yeah, no, I'm cool with it. It'll probably usually that anyway, so comes up front. And even so, it wouldn't matter.
I don't want to miss anything.
Well, you'll have the streams and stuff, and if you want to stay a little bit after class, then it's like, hey, I was lost here. Just take advantage of Christmas schedules typically, you know, so or you could work. So,
Well, there's one thing I want to run by them that I thought after I left, because if they didn't even get ready to leave training a little early so I can get here, I'm trying to not miss any class time.
yeah, and maybe we can compromise and say, like, maybe one day we can.
Yeah. I'm going to talk to them about it, but see how far they go. They haven't offered me a job, but I'm going to put their step.
Well, yeah, let me know what happens, and we'll do that.
Just walk by the door outside and they're all out there smoking. And the first thing I hear out of Garrett's mouth was, remember that time when MySQL wasn't working for you? Also, somebody fucking pulled the handlebar off the bathroom.
Yeah.
Anything else next summer?
I guess it's optional, but it's due next Wednesday. The next homework, as in the one that's due to Wednesday, or the one that's due the next Wednesday?
Is it due Wednesday? I thought it was due Saturday.
Which one are you talking about?
Whatever next one was due.
Okay, so that one, the Burger Maker one, I believe is due Wednesday. What about it?
No, I don't know.
I would verify with Stephanie and Chris. Also a good idea. We have literally one more activity left in class that is slated for 15 minutes. Yeah, I mean, people gotta go to the bathroom and stuff, right? No.
It's like crack. It's pretty much crack, I'm pretty sure.
Nice.
Because when you have one...
And you're drinking coffee too?
Yeah, well, I gotta stay up till like 6 a.m. I woke up today at noon because I was at my girlfriend's house. So, went to Bliss this weekend.
Oh, nice.
Got back Sunday night, went to my girlfriend's house. She leaves for work in the morning, so I slept there till like noon. And then I went home to then come here because she lives by me.
So between noon and 6:30.
Oh, I was at home.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't like sleep because I already slept for like 8 hours.
What did you think of Diablo?
Dude.
That would have been interesting to be at.
Have you seen the trailer on YouTube? Negative 227,000 votes. And
Yeah.
10 up.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody was really mad, especially some of the people I went with. His favorite franchise, Diablo, and he's like, what?
Yeah. I don't, like, I feel I'm torn about it. Like, I don't think that they should have pitched it there. Like, I think it's cool that they do that, that's fine, but that was the wrong place to show it.
To reveal it? Absolutely.
Yeah, because those are the hardcore fans that are there, right? They don't give a shit about your mobile game. But I also think people are overreacting a bit. If they want to make Diablo on the phone, who cares? Don't buy it. Don't participate in it. And that's fine. Like, I get it. It sucks because it's not what you wanted. But it's definitely not something to, like, be mortified over, right?
It was more of like a kick in the teeth because it's pretty much a reskin of some Chinese model.
Yeah, I saw that too. Who knows what the deal is? Reddit's funny because the people on there in their speculation is just ridiculous, right? All the Redditors were like, "Oh, who would do this?" and like, basically just saying shit like, "Oh, the people up top, they have no idea. They've lost total, like, they've completely lost touch with their fan base." And it's like, you know, they've got some other plan. They're probably not marketing to those hardcore fans. They're probably marketing to the random Chinese, you know, people that play a ton of mobile phones.
Eventually, I feel like if they would have just remastered D2 and then been like, hey, by the way, the expansion tells you about like whatever this story is supposed to tell you, just give the D2 expansion out of nowhere, like that would have been great. Everybody would then just go back to D2 and then you still have D3 and you can expand the story there. But everybody was really upset.
Yeah, was there anything else good though?
I just planted myself. I played Roses for them. Their MOBA. I planted myself for the championship.
Oh, nice. I used to watch StarCraft a lot and play, but I don't know. That was like freshman.
StarCraft?
No.
For the first time in 20 years, a non-Korean won MOBA championship.
Really? Who?
Kim from Finland beat a Korean.
Who won?
His name is.
You won the GSL? Yeah, Foreigner wins GSL. Cyril. Cyril.
Some kid from Finland who looks like the dude from the movie The New Guys. See that movie? Super.
Sounds familiar. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That has, not even come close to happening before.
It has, in the history of StarCraft, never happened.
Yeah, I knew that.
StarCraft for 20 years has been dominated by Koreans.
How did that kid win? Just lucky, or?
On the internet. It's a DD.
Good player.
Well, obviously, yeah.
About this whole.
His after interview was so funny because he's like, he was so nonchalant about it. He was like, I mean, I came here to win, and that's what I did. I won.
Slack out the link,
I bet that was a huge kick in the teeth to all the Koreans. They're like, oh no.
It
But
doesn't matter because now they won the HOTS championship and they won the Overwatch championship.
yeah, I feel like Favor is moving away from StarCraft now anyway. It's going to Overwatch and Heart of the Swarm.
Stars been flying over my head for the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, the Koreans.
Not so much in HOTS. They have like one good team, but
Well, League of Legends, I wonder how big they are in League of Legends. Because League of Legends is bigger than all of them now. And Fortnite's getting up there. And...
Koreans still play a lot of Dota 2.
Oh, do they? Dota 2 sucks.
A lot of people still play Dota.
They don't like it.
No, because they read the whole so it is.
Yeah, they. If it wasn't for the Europeans being cocky, they could have maybe had the HOTS championship.
It was on BBC.
They grew super hard.
I actually watched it.
But yeah, I didn't watch any of the Overwatch games. Some games been going about Overwatch League.
All I know about is the Diablo stuff because it was such a big deal on Reddit, so I don't really follow
What's
it.
funny was at BlizzCon, I actually saw a dude taking a picture with this flip phone, and then my friend next to me is like, I wonder how he's gonna play Diablo Mobile.
Situation, but I read about it on Reddit now.
Right, now I believe, I see, I knew there's some truth in there. You're welcome.
Is everyone online ready to go? Because we've got everyone here physically ready to go. I'll give them the... Heather is typing something. I don't know what it is. Something's coming.
She just doesn't do it.
Okay, bye, Heather. Heather said she's leaving. Bye, Heather. Everyone said bye, Heather. Good luck.
Take care of the watch.
All right. So, we actually only have really one activity left, somehow. So that's good. We're going to talk a little bit about validations. So, one of the things that this magical thing does for us, and let me make sure it's started again, so I don't crash anything. Cool, we're good. I blew away all my database changes, I guess. Great. Okay, so one of the things that this does is prevents us from, say, adding an empty to-do. It does some other stuff behind the scenes. So we can't have more than 140 characters. So if I do something crazy long, just go. Can't do it. Just clears it. Nope, not going to work. It also automatically sets that Boolean flag for completed to false if you don't set that. So there are these ideas of there's this idea of validations, right? So what we've done with validation so far has all been UI, correct? We've had either something that's prevented a button from posting, or we've given a nice message, or something that says no, you can't do that. But on the server side, it's usually safer to do your validations on the server side, if not both, right? Because you may want automatic, like quick response times for the client. So if they type in, too many characters, you can say, hey, there's too many characters. But definitely on the server, you want to be able to validate the input coming into the database. You don't want to let bad data in your database, because then you've got a huge problem that's really hard to take care of. So how could we potentially do that? Anyone have an idea how we could potentially do that? How do we take this request, right, that comes in with a body and a bunch of information? How do we prevent it from going in the database without, with bad data? If the data is bad, don't do anything.
request coming in doesn't have certain parameters.
Right. If the request doesn't have certain parameters, it can't go in the database, right? Because there may be required fields that we don't have. What if we decide that the to-do is too long and we don't want it in? How could we check that? We could have maybe an if statement or something. Yeah, so there's a lot of ways that we can check the request coming in, make sure that that data is good. But what if we just, I mean, shouldn't Sequelize have a nice way for us to do this so we don't have to do a bunch of if checks? And the answer is they do. Yeah, they don't probably do. They definitely do. So there's a couple links I'm going to slack out. One on validations and one on, oh crap, I just closed the lesson plan. Whoops, hold on. There's another one I want to slack out too. That has to do, that you can read if you would like. It has to do with resyncing the database, because we're going to need to resync the database in this next activity. But the validations link is really important. What I want you to do is look over the validations link with people around you and stuff. Kind of talk about how you could get validations in there. We need to make sure that we don't have a null string. We need to make sure that we have minimum and maximum lengths on a string. We need to make sure that we don't have a null Boolean value, right? So how could we do that with these validations and some of the other model definitions that Sequelize gives us? Spend a couple minutes looking at that, and then we're going to go ahead and start the next activity. So for this next activity, activity 10, we're going to take these validations. You have some instructions here on what you need to validate, and you need to get them into your Sequelize models so that this bad data cannot get in your database. So that's what we're doing next. So go ahead and start working on that when you're ready. You're going to need to use those docs. You're going to have to drill through them to kind of figure out exactly what you're going to have to do, but it's possible.
Do we want to allow numbers?
You really only need to make sure you have at least one character, no more than 140, and that blank strings don't get in the text. And then you need to default that Boolean value to false if nothing's provided, right? And then you're going to have to resync these changes to your database because they add constraints in your database for you. So they'll add not null checks and stuff like that. Now we have like 50 folders.
Yeah. Oh wait, so that basically just like this. And then one minute from 40 minutes. I don't know how it works, but it's fun. I don't think you can do it on this. Does that make it count? Must be your number of pennies.
Oh, like cents.
So if I do that right here,
Yeah, sure.
No, it's just abstract. Yeah. It's trying to do a few different things because I was trying to add it in there, and then this was just the thing that Nor found.
So that's not where you want to have it. So you want to put these validations. No, there's not going to be a separate one. They're going to be based off of the fields, right? But you need to create the field as a first data type. That needs to be an object. I mean, an object will define information about the field.
So then instead of this right here, then I'll make that an object, and then I put that in there theoretically.
Theoretically, it isn't is one of the validations. But you look at the validations document because there's specific rules for the validation.
They have it. I just want to do a quick test. So I had A, and then the one I pressed.
So look at the validations docs. Make sure you're following those.
I was trying to use these things.
Look at how this is defined. Type, string, and then validate is another option.
Yeah. So I have that in there. So if I get, just like that's what it was. Oh wait, so this would still have to be an object.
That's
right?
an object with the type of string, and then a validate object. There's two objects, so look at the doc. The property is string,
Yeah.
this type is string, and then there's another object validate, and then validate is the is int. See? So you're missing one.
So I have this. So then this would still be the same, wouldn't it?
You can do that, sure, but then you can't have validators for it.
Okay. So this right here would be essentially what I have for text.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
You're on it?
Okay, so that'll be the text. And then the type. String. And then another object. So text type is equal to value in one match. So you can't do SQL instructions. I mean, it has to be your data type. Because it's going to say SQL is not defined. This is not. And the error. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's because we use data types in the function callback. Because we're using the data, same thing for the data types in the like under it. So we just use data type stuff instead of SQL. Really? Yeah. So just like that. Yeah. Oh wait, yeah, just like the bottom. Right. Wait, what? Yeah, data type that one you're right. Because you're adding that to the database as so you're adding a field complete to the database. Yeah, but now it's going to blow up when you try to add some stuff in the same spot. Okay, so it says min one max. So I'll put A in there. A lot of work. But I have to put a over 10. Which becomes a plus 11. Okay, because you're validating for that. It should be length. It should be a property of L and so validate and take get rid of both of those and put LEN and then make assign a value. It's like going to be an array, and the minimum number would be 1 on the max number. No. Actually put the numbers in here, but 1 is on 140. I don't think you can just because it's shit. So then how come it doesn't show up like that in docs? Yeah. It does. Just go in. It's right there. LEN. Like, we only will allow values or integers between X and X.
So what is the minimum for?
I have no idea. Read what it says next to it. Only allows values less than, I think that's like the number. Route, yeah. So, okay, only allows length. Okay, so it should work. It's probably gonna blow up, so.
Try it.
So there's nothing, check your console login. Yeah, see if there's like, equalize validation error, try adding something.
So, we're close, but we're tight.
Oh, wow.
One invalid object.
If I have one more. Okay, so I think it's supposed to be there. No, I get that error message. Like, mine doesn't. Because I'm trying to. I also did the not null and not empty part. At the same time. Oh, wait, did you delete? Oh, it's because you got rid of this. The text. Yeah, so the text you turn it into an object, right? And you know, I wasn't doing that because that's
a lot of nested objects. We're gonna go over time.
Oh, so you turn text into the property. Yeah, I was kind of confused on that. Yeah, so this should look. Yeah, there we go. Now it looks. So let's get rid of all of these. We're trying to message some of the words we're doing. Maybe that goes through. I got rid of my validation. I got rid of my validation for not null, and it still doesn't mind that. Like if it's empty, we add an empty one. Really? Yeah, I think it's because we have the length. If the length is not 1, if the length is not minimum of 1, it won't do it. So you don't really need to double check it, I guess.
Well, the not null also protects your database because when you resync, it'll add the not null flag to that field.
Because there's also like a not empty string one that I added both of those. But if it's checking for a minimum length of 1,
so as a hint, so this is a good breakdown of what these objects can look like, right? And I know there's a lot going on, but let's note it. Let's point out a couple of things. So this is where we have our connection, right? And we call define. We define the table. In this case, it'll be to do, right? These outermost properties are the names of the columns in the table. So for instance, if I want to take a name column and make it type string, I can do it like this, define it in an object, or I can do it like we've been doing, where we just set it equal to sequelize.string, right? So we've been taking text and setting it directly equal to data types.string, sequelize.string, whatever you want to say. But you can also nest that in an object. That object, that first level, those are the properties of that column in the database. Okay, so for instance, type or allow null. Do you want it to be null or not? Default value. Do you want it to be a default value? So if it's an integer, you could set it to 0 or 1 or 10. Or if it's a string, you could set it to an empty string or some random name. Then there's also a validate object. Validate is its own object inside of the column properties. And in here, you can define things like minimum and maximum length, whether or not it can be a number, whether or not it can be empty, an empty string or not, and all kinds of things, right? date validations, if it's a credit card, if it's an email, if it's a URL. So there's a lot of nesting of objects going on in here, and you're going to see this a lot in JavaScript and a lot in node configurations and stuff. So being able to make sense of this kind of object structure is pretty important. So we should get used to seeing it, right? So with that in mind, does that clarify some questions people are having? I understand this is a lot going on, and it's pretty confusing to read all of these curly braces. Like, this is not exactly intuitive to read. There's a whole lot going on, a lot of syntax. As I was telling Kyle, using plugins like Prettier or Beautify or something to format your code for you when you're trying to figure out something like this is really helpful, because they get really nested and really ugly, and it's hard to kind of, you know, wander through them and make sense of what's going on. But if you have good, really good, solid format, it makes it easier. For sure, it makes it easier.
I like to comment out on the lines that close, like what it's closing.
You can do that, comment, open, and close and stuff if you want. Yeah, you can do that. Anything to help really is what you need. Need to find out how you can do it. So let's take model. Now instead of just doing data types dot string like so, like we were, we have this object, right? Well, one, we have to define the type. That's the most important one. Once we have that, we can work on other properties, including allow null. We do not want to allow null in the text property. It makes no sense to have a to-do with null text. What's the point of the to-do? And then we also want to validate that we can't have a blank to-do, right? So we don't want a to-do in there that's not null but is literally blank. So we should at least require one character. You might want to be more strict than that. You might want to say there's no such thing as a to-do with one character. What are you going to type in there? What does that mean? What kind of to-do is that, right? So maybe you can make it 4 characters or something, so they have to put a real word at least. Dog. Well, can you put dog? 3 characters. Dog. You know, that could be your to-do. And then a maximum set right here too, 140. We want a tweet length to-dos, right? Or old tweet length to-dos. We don't want to have crazy long to-dos in our whole paragraphs, because you'll never be able to read through them, or it'll just make the UI look bad. I don't know. So the other property was complete, right? And that's a Boolean. What we wanted to do there was define a default value. We want it to be false first thing. As soon as it creates the new field on the column, it should be false. If for some reason you don't set it or whatever. That's how we define it. So that's well and good. We've done this. They're going to actually affect the database structure. So how do we do that? Well, if we go back to our server.js, where we have our sync, if you remember on Saturday, I said we can run this sync force true instead of just the empty sync, and it'll actually blow away everything in the database and start it again. So remember, if you run this, you're going to lose all your data. So it's fine. We're in dev mode right now. We're just kind of adding things. It's totally cool to do this. But if you do this on a production application, prepare for people to be really upset that they're using your app. But that's it. What was important was seeing how we can add more strict rules about the data that's allowed to be in our database, right? In an easy, kind of unintrusive way. And this is our unintrusive way, is we tell SQLize what to do to prevent bad data, right? Any questions on this activity?
Can you go over the sync again?
Go over the sync part?
Yeah.
So right here, you have the SQLize sync, but now we pass in an option that says force true, which forces the table to be blown away. The regular sync, if the table exists, won't do anything. This one blows it away and starts fresh. And if you make changes to a table, say you had 1 column, you need to use force to get it in there. Or you need to have a migration script.
So you would want to do this every time you essentially start your app?
I would want to do this only if I'm a developer who's not released the app and I'm making changes to the database schema rapidly. Once you release an app, you usually don't want to make rapid changes to the database schema, and if you do, you need to be safe about migrating, right? You'll make changes to the schema, that's going to happen, but you need to have, you know, very robust migrations. Any other questions on this activity?
Yeah, why would you not put the allow null inside the validate object.
Why would you not put it inside the validate? Because it has to do, the validate won't affect the schema of the database. If we put the allow null here, outside of validate, it will, and that's better. Then we can't even have null in the database.
Because there was a validate option that says like, not null, and you can set it to true.
If we refresh this now, and then we do a create table, man. We need to send it to create table, don't save. We should be able to, send it here. You can see that now our text is not null, and our complete is a default of 0. So like these are from that SQLize. It actually affected the schema.
And that's why the sync you would want, if you're making that change to the not null, you would want to sync this right.
Yes.
Null with
Absolutely. Let me make sure there are no questions in Slack I'm missing. Nope. Alright, so we have the solutions for every activity we did today. If you need any other activities, I'll upload them to GitLab. But you can go back and look at those. Otherwise, that's it. That's all we got. So, I'll see you guys on Wednesday. And remember, next Monday, we do not have class. It's Veterans Day. Next Monday, we do not have class. It's Veterans Day.
Are we going to switch back to our normal schedule after that?
Nope, we'll be one more day off. And after Thanksgiving, we'll still be a day off. I think after Christmas.
The next homework is
Yes.
like the next homework after this Wednesday isn't for 2 weeks.
That means it's coming.
And I am stopping this stream, so
So we have homework
good night, stream.